Okay, so thank you for joining us today. Today is 2 November, the day after Jackson-Hamilton Day or Liberty Day. Hope you enjoyed a good break. We have a number of students with us today. What we're going to do today is review the requirements for the Module 4 solution. The Module 4 solution essentially allows you to leverage your understanding of basic digital components and create your own machine, your own computer, not in the HDL simulator. We completed any additional work for this course with the HDL simulator in Module 3. So we will not return to the HDL simulator, except for a special case and special topics, and that's time permitting. So what we'd like to do today is to extend our idea of virtual components. In your 4.2 assignment, we ask you to highlight the name of your computer in File Explorer and then select Device Manager. And in the 4.2 assignment, you were to identify components that have a resources tab and then capture a screen that shows the memory address range that's allocated for each of those virtual machines. We stated clearly that virtualization of each of the physical hardware components is a function of the operating system. And we revisit and extend those ideas in other courses like CSC 410, Principles of the Operating System, and CSC 255, Operating System Deployment Best Practices. The important thing to understand is that many different software applications could not work properly if there wasn't a common denominator. Everybody has a different processor. Everybody has different memory modules. Everybody has different storage controllers, hard disk drives, display adapters, and it's impossible for software developers to write software that plays nice with each of those separate brands and models, right? Instead, a virtual representation of those devices is created, right? Everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one thing that happened a few decades ago, a gentleman by the name of Moore, who was a pioneer for Intel. Moore was renowned for his concept it's called Moore's Law. Has anyone here ever heard of Moore's Law?
Yeah.
No,
I don't think so.
Okay, so what we want to do is take a moment to highlight Moore's Law. And Moore's Law is, hang on just a sec, please. Okay, I'm back. So Moore's Law essentially is a standard of computer architecture. Many years ago, a gentleman by the name of Moore, a former CEO of Intel, right? So Fairchild Semiconductor, and then later on Intel, came up with this idea that every 18 months to 2 years, the capacity of digital hardware components would double. It would double every 2 years, okay? So what are we saying? We're saying that the number of logic gates, the number of transistors, the number of memory registers, the size of hard disks, the capacity and performance of graphics cards, that essentially, because of the way the industry was progressing, every 2 years, the capacity of that physical hardware would double. And what you see here is a graph or a representation of that progression over decades. And in some cases, it was a little less. In some cases, it was a little more. But on the whole, that law has held true. Well, why do you care? It's true that hardware, in most cases, has far outpaced, the performance and capacity of hardware has far outpaced the performance and capacity of software. So when you talk about technology, whether it's personal technology or business technology, it doesn't matter. Hardware is way ahead of software, is way ahead of operating systems, is way ahead of networking. And so you have this huge leap every 2 years. The capacity doubles, the capacity doubles, the capacity doubles. So much so that the average laptop is capable of running or operating not just one computer, but many computers. So in simple terms, and this is module 4 material, what you have is a case where the components, and MOSFET is a type of material component that we will investigate further, but basically you'll see this reference to MOSFET. It stands for metal oxide semiconductor field effect transistor.
Always funny. I see no difference here, just a real picture. Me neither. Don't see the difference.
Hello, is there a question?
Okay, I want y'all to look at this video, right? Because it's a fake.
Okay, I had to mute someone. So if there was a question, please give us a heads up in the chat or raise your hand. Thank you. Okay, so what we have here is a progression where the hardware, any questions about what we mean by Moore's law now? The MOSFET component essentially has shrunken in size. So what you're seeing here is a progression of how these transistors have shrunken in size until the point where you're going from micrometers, millionths of a meter, to billionths of a meter, right? So these are extremely small components, and now we're down to the 5 and 3 nanometer range. The fact that a transistor can be 5 nanometers large is an amazing thing, but the simple truth is you get to a place where you can't go any smaller. And there's a prediction that Moore's law is going to crash. Basically, it's going to stop when the materials we work with now, essentially silicon, and the fabrication techniques that we use, where we're etching components into silicon wafers, that we won't be able to take it any further. And then now there's talk about quantum computers, right? So the workaround is, okay, we're going to do quantum computing, which is even smaller, and that gets into very interesting territory. In any case, there's been a prediction that Moore's law is going to come to a screeching halt. Well, where does that leave you? If you have a laptop that has 8 gigs of RAM and you have tens of gigabytes of available hard disk space, and when I say tens of gigabytes, I mean you can have as little as 8 gigabytes of hard disk space or 6 gigabytes of hard disk space. There are versions of Linux that you can install and create a virtual machine within your machine. So we're talking about a guest machine that's operating on top of a physical machine. So what you're seeing here is my physical desktop on my laptop. And one would call this my host. The physical machine that is used to host virtual machines it's basically, it operates in one of two manners. Either the component to virtualize systems runs directly off the metal, off the physical hardware. That's called a type 1 hypervisor. And in cases where you have client technology and you're running a software program like Oracle VirtualBox, the host is actually running all sorts of applications, just as you are on your PCs and laptops. But essentially, the hypervisor or virtual machine application, the hosting environment for the virtual machine, it's running like any other application, and the host machine is it's using an operating system. So what am I saying? The host machine has an operating system with virtualized components, and like any other application, the resources to create virtual machines is running like any other application on top of the operating system, okay? That's a type 2 hypervisor. Once again, type 1 hypervisor is sitting on top of bare metal. There's no operating system. There are no other applications. It is industrial strength, really high performance. It's intended for powerful workstations and servers, data center kinds of things. The virtual machine environment is sitting right on top of the physical components, what we call bare metal, right? It's sitting right on top of the bare metal. Any questions about hypervisor types before we continue? Your first task for the Module 4 solution is to engage a website called virtualbox.org. And if you have done this already in other classes with me, then you still need to stick around because the implementation here is going to be a little different. What you want to do is click into this. Now, VirtualBox is open source. It's basically offered as a resource freely to the general public by a company known as Oracle. Oracle is also responsible for other technology resources that are known and loved, like the Java programming language, MySQL, and so on, right? So VirtualBox is unique among all open source virtualized environments in that VirtualBox provides an option for Windows, for Mac clients, and for Linux. So if you're running Ubuntu or you're running a flavor of Linux on your machine, they've also developed a new version for the Mac OS that runs using the M1 and M2 ARM processors, the high performance processors for the latest MacBooks and iMacs and Mac Pros, Mac Minis. So if you've recently purchased a MacBook and you've been frustrated because it's hard to find a virtual machine option for your MacBook, some of you know what I'm talking about. If you've been in other classes or you've done this on your own, it's really hard because this new hardware wasn't supported. It was only Intel platforms or Intel hosts. But there are two flavors for the Mac environment now. There's also a flavor for Unix, meaning the original legacy multi-user, multitasking operating system that was created by competitors of the IBM mainframe industry and PC and Apple computers, right? So you get more options here, and that's the cool part. It's free, and it supports more platforms than any other, and that's really cool. Any questions about VirtualBox and what we just explained? Okay. So your goal is to download the flavor of VirtualBox that matches your personal technology. If you have a Mac that has an Intel processor, you're going to click here. It'll download a DMG file. If you're a Windows machine, you're going to download this. And what's going to happen is that this is going to be posted into your downloads folder. The other thing you're going to do is download the extension pack. The extension pack is a special it's a special library of virtual components that translates your particular brand and model of hardware into virtual components inside the virtual machine. So it's kind of like a universal translator, and you'll see more about this in just a minute, but essentially everyone needs to click this one as well. So you're going to download one of these and you're going to download this. And if you run into problems, you're going to check to see if you have a corrupted download or not. I'm not going to go into that detail right now. What I'd like to do is tell you that this resource here is a good fallback if we're having problems loading it on your machine. Another issue that often comes up is that before VirtualBox is installed, students also need to go into the BIOS of their system and enable virtual support. Many of you have done this already, but if you haven't done this in any of my classes or previously, we should have a separate conversation. So this solution for Module 4 assumes that you're familiar with what BIOS is from previous modules we've covered, and you've enabled support for virtual machines. Any questions before we continue? When you install the VirtualBox, when you're ready to install this, you're going to right-click the download. So if I go ahead and do this, and I have a decent connection, within 10 seconds, I have this thing. I'll go ahead and click this extension pack as well. Now, what's the value added here? If you're in another course with me this semester, you've probably already done this, and these steps are already done. So if you're not, then you're doing it for the first time. And it's really important to take these steps one at a time. So I go into my downloads folder, and I'm going to first select, and then I'm going to right-click and run as administrator. Now, if you have a good download, short of calculating the MD5 hash for those downloads, you should have, if you look at the properties, an exe file that is exactly, precisely 110,099,464 bytes. If your download doesn't match this, then there could be a different version number, or what you downloaded was corrupt. Any questions? Make sure that you reference this part of our recording, and that your download, when you look at the properties for the size, not size on disk, but size, matches this number, 110,099,464 bytes. Any questions? Same thing is true for the extension pack. You're going to look at the properties, and if you had a complete and proper download, you'd have 18,515,967 bytes. So that would be one way to tell whether or not you have a complete and proper download. Once again, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to install the VirtualBox application by selecting it with a single left mouse click, and then with your right mouse button, you're going to right click it and run as administrator. Now you're going to want to be using login with administrative privileges to do this. So if you happen to be using a standard user account, you'll probably want to log in with your maintenance or support or administrative account. And then in addition to being logged in with an administrative account, you also want to intentionally run as administrator here. That's going to basically make some changes on your system, including your networking. And it'll bark at you and say, hey, if you keep doing this, it may disrupt your network connection. Are you sure you want to do this? And you say yes. When you're done with that installation, before you restart your system, you're going to double click this. Now, why don't you right-click and run as admin? The extension, the file extension of this is different. It's not an executable. It's a supplement. It's a supplement of libraries for the executable that was installed. So when you try to right-click it, you won't see the option to run as admin, and that's normal. But you go ahead and do that. Now on a Mac, the process is similar. You'll double-click the DMG file. There'll be a screen that comes up and says double-click this to install it. It's going to ask you questions about whether or not you should allow Oracle to make changes to your privacy and security settings. You're going to answer yes. Then you're going to go ahead and double-click the extension pack, and that's going to install the extension pack. It's probably a pretty good idea to reboot your system at that point. Everyone should have a simple screen. By the time you finish that simple setup, you should be able to go to the VirtualBox application that's sitting on your desktop. And the first criteria that you must satisfy for the Module 4 solution is a screenshot that shows this view, where you start your VirtualBox Manager. You double-click on the VirtualBox icon. It opens a screen called the VirtualBox Manager. You go to the Help menu, and you select About VirtualBox. It should show that version 7.0.2 or higher is installed. Once again, 7.0.2 or higher. Why am I saying or higher? Well, there may be a .0, there may be a 0.3, a .4. By the time you finish completing this activity, there might be a new version out. There's been a lot of new versions lately. Any questions on what we're doing here so far? Step 2. You're going to go to a website. Can somebody like unmute your mic and respond just so I know you're still there? I don't want to be talking to myself in a room. Okay. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Step 2. You're going to go to the Debian website, debian.org. Okay. So does everybody see the web address here?
Yes.
Now, you may be familiar with many flavors of Linux. But I want to tell you that Debian is sort of like a grandfather version of Linux. It's a very light version of Linux. It has a very low footprint. What we mean by that is it requires very little resources to operate. Debian, the Debian kernel of the Debian operating system that you can use to create a virtual machine, or you can use to install an operating system on a physical machine, right? It requires very little resources, but the cool part is the kernel of this operating system, the heart and lungs and brain, so to speak, of this operating system, are also the foundation upon which Ubuntu, Mint, Kali, there's all sorts of other flavors of Linux that are derived in part from the Debian operating system, the Debian kernel. Our primary interest in using Debian is that it's got a very small, very efficient footprint. When I go to debian.org, I'm going to click the download option, and what you're going to do is you're going to look for the 64-bit version 11.5.0, right? And there's an option for alternate download sites, but I want you to click this, right? And when you click this, what will happen is that it may start downloading the ISO directly. And one thing I want you to appreciate is that when you're downloading this option, and I'm going to go to the downloads page here, right? supposed to see this open downloads page. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
So, so most Linux distributions, the Kali distribution, if you download a Kali appliance, it's a couple of gigabytes large. And when you finish installing it, it takes up 10 gigabytes of footprint, right? A Windows server download is 4 gigabytes of space, right? And we're going to download your Windows Server operating system to create a virtual machine later in the course for our special topics. But what you're going to see here is that Debian, the download is only 382 megabytes. There are many cumulative updates for Windows that are larger than the Debian download. So with a halfway decent internet connection, you're done very quickly. 300 and some odd megabytes. It's not even, it's a third of a gigabyte basically. So it's a very small, very efficient file. What I want you to do is to capture a screenshot of your properties of the ISO file. So the second item that you need to submit for your module 4 solution for step 2 is a complete download that shows this result. Once again, we're going to right click the ISO and we're going to select properties. I want you to highlight the size of this ISO file. So I want to see Debian 11.5.0 AMD 64, and that just means 64-bit, and it works for Intel or AMD processors. And I want to see 400.556.032 highlighted on your screen. You're going to capture a screenshot that shows this, and that tells me that you have a proper install file for Debian. Any questions so far?
You want the screenshot of the sizes for the Debian, the Oracle, and the VirtualBox? Is that what I'm getting?
We want the screenshot. The first submission is a screen capture where you go to the help menu and say about, and it shows the version number here for VirtualBox. Okay. That's the first thing you need to do. And if you've already got VirtualBox installed because you're in other classes, I mean, all you got to do is pull up that menu and you're done. That's the first step. That's the submission for the first step. You could paste this screenshot. You could use an alt print screen or clip it out, but you can paste this image, and that's step 1. Step 2 is showing me the properties of the Debian download, and I want to see to the byte, to the exact number of bytes, you have a proper ISO for Debian. Okay, does that answer your question? That's step 2. So you're gonna capture this. If I used alt print screen and I opened up a new paint window, I could do this, and I could save it as step2.jpg, or I could paste it into a Word document under the heading step 2. Either would be fine. Okay. All right. So what are we doing next? You're going to create a new virtual machine, and you might already have a couple of virtual machines if you're in another class, but it's pretty simple and it's a very quick process, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to use the new option here, and you're going to type the name Debian, and then without a space or punctuation, put trial. Okay, Debian trial. One other thing that you should probably do as well is you should create a VM folder on your C drive. And if you haven't done this already for another class, you want to get into File Explorer, and then you want to create a VM directory inside your C drive so that you can store the folder for your virtual machines in the VM directory off of your C drive, okay? Now, the moment you type Debian, what happens is that this screen knows automatically, okay, he's talking about Linux. Oh, he's talking about Debian 64-bit. And the ISO image, you're going to select, you can hit the pull down here and choose other, and then go where? To your downloads folder. Go into your downloads folder, and there's your Debian. So this is what you're going to do. You will include this ISO. It'll be the folder for your virtual machine will be listed here, and it's C:\VM. If you have any questions about how to set this up, the name is going to be Debian trial, no space, no punctuation in camel case, so the first letters are capitalized. And you're going to say finish. Now, if you're in guided mode, the screen's going to look different. If you open up VirtualBox and it does this, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to say Debian trial and VM, right? You'll select, you'll navigate to the other option and go to your VM directory. You'll hit the pull down and hit other and select Debian out of the, right? Everybody with me?
Yeah.
You say next. It's going to ask you if you want to set up an unattended guest OS install. And it's going to suggest a password and a username. And you'd want to look at that. So the username is change me. And I would suggest that you do this, right? It'll also install the guest editions when it builds this thing. That's a cool feature. You should select that. And the default will be the guest editions that were installed when you set up guest editions. So guest editions are the extension pack that you loaded. And when the virtual machine is built, extensions are going to pop up inside as guest editions. Okay. Any questions so far?
Nope.
You're going to want to give half the RAM of your laptop or PC. If you have 12, you're going to want to put 6 gigs of RAM, right? 6 gigs of RAM. And 6 gigabytes of RAM is essentially 6 times 1024. So that's exactly 6144. I can make quicker work of this if I just highlight the number and type 6144. If you have multiple CPUs, you can increase the number of CPUs to 2. But if you only have 2 CPUs, leave it at 1. Okay. I'd just leave it at 1. And I'd put half the RAM here. In 1 more minute, I'm going to hit the pause button and I'll continue the recording. And then the rest of the steps for the solution will be part of this class recording. I know some of you need to clear and get to another class, so I don't want you to feel pressured by the time clock. If some of you need to clear the class right now because you gotta get to another class, I'll understand. But I just thought I would offer, all I did was update attendance here real quick. So I'll go ahead and finish this process, but let's click next. Create a virtual hard disk now. I want you to create an 8 gig hard disk. 8 gigabytes is all you'll need. I don't want you to pre-allocate the full size. I don't want you to use an existing. And then click next. And then click finish. Now it's this screen. I want you to pull the screen down. I want you to pull the screen down so that everything shows. And it is this image I want you to capture for step 3. Is everyone clear on what's required for step 3?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll print screen, paint. Here we go. So that's step 3. That's what we're doing for step 3. I'm going to click the finish. And now it's going to go ahead and power on this machine. Now, I may get an interesting result here. If it doesn't boot to the ISO first, I may have to make some adjustments. I may also have to go into settings. So the last 2 parts of this, I want to go ahead and what you're seeing here is the Debian ISO. So another screen is going to appear. This is the virtual machine window. And it's starting to load the ISO because it knows, okay, this is a new installation. I'm creating a new virtual machine. As opposed to an appliance. That's another topic for another time. It's going to have little pop-ups here on the side, and I want to use the blue X to clear those. Those are just common reminders or notices about how the mouse and keyboard are integrated with your virtual machine. Put another way, if I am working this, and I'm also doing some things out here on my desktop with my laptop or PC, there are times where my mouse disappears or my keyboard doesn't work unless I click into the screen. So you have to be intentional about moving your mouse into the screen, clicking, and then pressing a key in order for this stuff to work, right? So this is pretty automagic. And it says, okay, I'm going to work a DHCP configuration. And it's likely that the Debian virtual machine that it creates is going to use a network interface configuration known as NAT instead of bridged. That's not something we're going to go into detail here now. But in a very short period of time, what's going to happen is that you're going to see that a full-blown virtual machine is going to appear before your very eyes. One of 2 things will happen. You'll run into a minor difficulty where you resolve an error in here by going into settings, and it'll show a yellow exclamation point. And yes, it shows here that the network is NAT, right? So we're going to leave that the way it is. But if this thing fails and it doesn't come up into a clean screen where you can sign in with what password? Change me. What password? Everyone? Change me.
Change me.
Yeah, what should you do when you get inside your Debian and you get logged in? Should find the place to change the password and do what? Change me? Just saying, all right? And why would you want to do that? Well, if you're going to be running and noodling with your virtual machine and the rest of the world is watching the YouTube video and they know it, things can get pretty interesting pretty quickly. So while this is running, once again, if you have another class and you need to clear to catch your other class, I'm going to go ahead and post this recording as soon as we're finished. But I'll want you to do a couple of things with your virtual machine as soon as it's finished. So as this is installing in your system, while this screen is showing, I want you to capture this screen while the operating system is installing. I want you to capture this screen, and I want you to use that as step 4. So starting the machine and installing the operating system is step 4. And at any point along the way this is installing with the progress bar, you're going to move this to a nice place on your screen, and then you're going to click over onto your desktop, and then you're going to hit the print screen option. Because this isn't active, your window here isn't active. If you try to hit print screen while this is active, some weird things are going to happen. So once again, you move this to a nice place so it's prominently displayed. Then you click to the side on your desktop so that this is grayed out up here. Then you're going to press the print screen key, and you're going to open up either your Word document or another Paint document, and you'll go ahead and you can clip this out if you want. You can crop it. I'm going to use Control X to crop, and then I'm going to undo this so many times and then paste it again. Isn't that nice? So I just undo until I get a new empty JPEG file and then paste. That's step 4. This is the 4th item you need to capture for your module 4 solution. Any questions? And we're almost done. So as soon as this is finished, the setup is done. Now it's configuring. So what you're seeing now, if I minimize all my screens and go back, it is actually configuring the virtual machine. It's already been built. This is like a second phase of what's going on. And it's installing software for your virtual machine. And you can do this with as little as 6 gigs. So if you don't have 8 gigs of free hard drive space, you can do it with 6 gigs. Debian is very efficient and doesn't take up a lot of, you can run Debian with 1 gig of memory and 6 gigs of hard drive space. So if you're on a laptop with only 4 gigs of RAM and you only have 10 gigs of drive space left, you can still create the Debian virtual machine with 6 gigs of hard disk space and use only 1 gig of RAM. It just runs slower. It's not as fast. So I could have had 2 CPUs. I could have used 8 gigs of RAM instead of 6, and the performance of this virtual machine during install would be faster, and it would complete sooner. Any questions while we're waiting for this to complete? Resume recording. So by the miracle of video recording, we've skipped over the last so many minutes of other installation progress. And when it automatically boots, you'll see the screen. You might see some error messages. You might see a blinking cursor or a single cursor where it doesn't seem to be doing anything. It's okay to click in. It's okay to click into the screen. It's okay to hit enter on your keyboard. If it feels like, if you think that it's been sitting for long, typically if you just watch and wait, whether the cursor is blinking or it's solid, eventually you'll see a screen. And, but again, if you don't, it's okay to take your mouse and then click into it or hit enter. This is the screen you'll see when Debian version 11 is finished loading. And when I click this, my option is change me. So I should be able to type in change me and then hit enter. And the first thing that should come up may be a password change option. But what we want to do is capture the screen that shows the desktop. That'll be the last step, the last artifact that you capture on screen And then that's, you either paste it into your Word document or a separate JPEG file. So here's Debian, and it is a computer system proper. It's an entire PC or laptop that's running inside your PC or laptop. And if you click on activities, that's a menu where you can select different things. You can use utilities or get help. There's Office software included. There's a graphical, version of the File Explorer like there is in Windows. There's a browser that's built in, Firefox, right? So essentially what you want to do is capture this screen after you click activities. So I can see something here. You're going to want to go over again, position your window, click on your desktop so that that's grayed out. Hit the print screen, paste that into your Word document or into Paint where you can clip it. That's step 5. That concludes the solution. So you have those 5 screenshots at different steps along the way. You'll see the solution posted shortly, and we'll stop recording and stop sharing at this point.